Thank you for joining us for Goethe Film Talk around the documentary series Writing the Land, airing and streaming on CBC as of October 2021 and already broadcast in Germany on ZDF and Arte. I am joined here at the Goethe-Institut Toronto today by Stephanie Weimar, the director of the documentary series Writing the Land, and Toronto authors Uzma Jalaluddin and Catherine Hernandez. Welcome. Both authors are part of this documentary about the relationship of land and writing, set against the backdrop of Canada as guest country of honor at the Frankfurt Book Fair. Both Catherine and Uzma have multiple other film industry-related news that I have to tease here. Catherine's award-winning novel Scarborough, and I can point it out here, we have all the books here, about three children who rely on each other growing up in a tough neighborhood, has been adapted for the screen by Hernandez and Sasha Nakai and Rich Williamson. The film has its world premiere at TIFF 21 and it's on the top of my to-watch list at the festival. Uzma just announced that Mindy Kaling will turn the novel Hana Carries On into an Amazon film, while Jalaluddin's debut novel Aisha at Last is already in development for Sony. So congratulations, exciting times for both of you, book-wise and film-wise, and we're lucky to have you here. But let's start at the beginning with what brings us together in this particular constellation, and that is Steph, in a way, and Writing the Land. Stephanie Weimar is an award-winning German-Canadian filmmaker, based here in Toronto, but often crisscrossing the country with her projects. Steph, you studied film at the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design University in Halifax, and a lot of your other projects that I've seen, many of them set in Canada's north, they all deal with Canadian cultures and landscapes, central themes in your work, also in Writing the Land, as we will find out when you tell us a bit about what the questions were that you brought to this particular project and what shape this series has taken.
Okay. Well, it really sort of got started in conversation with the production company Primitive Entertainment, as well as Marita Hübinger, the commissioning editor at Arte, because Arte wanted a series to celebrate Canadian literature at the same time when Canada was the guest of honor at the book fair. So that's kind of how it all started. And I was thinking, okay, well, what are sort of like the most common ways that literature is usually discussed in Canada, and what are some also thinking about the Germans, you know, like what are the Germans thinking when they think about Canada and Canadian literature? And so it was really sort of about, okay, well, maybe how can we present it in a different way? Because there are usually, when you think about Canadian literature, there is this sort of history of thinking about the land in sort of like in a very cliched kind of way, right? You're thinking about Canada, like the endless wilderness, you know, even though that's in and of itself like a really problematic term. But you know, you think about the prairies and the forests and the waterfalls, and the sort of idea of almost like a land devoid of people. But at the same time, I mean, that's the cliche, right? And then you're sort of thinking about, okay, well, there is this idea that this land has shaped the Canadian identity. That is sort of how it's usually discussed in this very cliched way. So for me, it was very much to think, okay, well, how can we tell this story differently? And how can we have people of this land present this land in a different way? And then it was really a question of, okay, well, who are the writers? And that's kind of where Catherine and Uzma come in, yeah. And 10 other people, because we decided we would have 3 writers per episode, 12 in total, and obviously it was a very, very difficult choice because there are so many really great writers. But it was really a question of, okay, how can we think about the country as where are the writers, and you know, and what are the different places that we can show, and what are the stories that we can tell, and that's really how I would say how it all came together.
Yeah. So how did specifically Uzma and Catherine then kind of get to where they are, and you'll tell us where they are in your series. And since we are talking Writing and Land, how did you decide to set up and film the chapters where you filmed them?
Okay. So as books were coming out, I was really just looking at, okay, like who is out there and who is mentioned and who has gotten an award, or, you know, like who's being talked about, who is exciting, who do I love, you know? Because I mean, there was also, if I may say so, that was a criteria.
Always a good one, if you like.
No, I wouldn't put it like that. I wouldn't put it like that. I was like, okay, you know, I mean, obviously one love a book. So, and obviously, like when I read Scarborough and when I read I Share at Last, it was very much like sort of love at first sight. And I was just really like, oh my God, yes, like we have to talk to Uzma and Catherine. And then it was really about, when it comes to the question of who is in which episode, it's very much about, so how I approached this was very much about, let's talk. Let's ask the writers first, especially when it was all about exploring the land that is important to the writers. Like, you know, like where is the place in this country that is important to them? And that's what we should explore together. Because I remember talking to you and you were like, oh yeah, the lake is so important.
Catherine said water.
Yeah, exactly.
Most definitely.
And
there's this beautiful line in the, we're not going to give any spoilers for the books or the series, but there's this one line where you basically nearly credit Lake Ontario as a co-creator in a way, right, as a collaborator. Mm-hmm. So there really is an authentic, original connection between those, where you were placed. Mm-hmm. And for you, Uzma, as well, I think we see you in that first scene that hopefully everybody will get to see in Writing the Land, and you say it's about illuminating space, and there's light. So to me it felt, yeah, these authors, these women are exactly where they need to be in this series. Okay, but let's not just talk about literature. It's literature, so we want to hear it. We want to hear the author's work and then try to connect about where you are both situated in your writing and what some of your commonalities or departures are. And we'll start with Catherine Hernandez, who is an award-winning author, playwright, and screenwriter from Scarborough in Toronto's East. Her debut novel, Scarborough, was a finalist for the Toronto Book Awards and the Trillium Book Award, among others, as well as longlisted for Canada Reads. Her second novel, Crosshairs, from which we're going to hear in a minute, was shortlisted for the Toronto Book Award, and it made the CBC's Best Canadian Fiction list, as well as NBC's 20 Best LGBTQ Books list of 2020. And her third children's book, Where Do Your Feelings Live? A guide for kids living through these scary times, will be published in winter 2022, I believe. And I made a calendar note yesterday, an iPhone calendar reminder, so that I will get it for my daughter, for sure. Catherine, do you want to set us up a bit for Crosshairs and then read a passage, please?
Certainly. So Crosshairs in a nutshell is a novel about a resistance of QT BIPOC, so that's queer, trans, people of color, disabled and elderly folks who band together to resist a fascist regime here in Canada in the not so distant future. And it's told from the point of view of Kay, who is a Black feminine gay man. And in the passage that I am about to read, he is en route to a pickup location because at this time, because of the fascist regime, he is escaping having to be put into a workhouse, being forced into a workhouse. And so he is in hiding in someone's backyard, waiting for someone to pick him up and bring him into a training camp. And a little girl sees him through the fence. "Hello!" A ball rolls towards the fence, and as the child comes to collect it, she peeks into the space between the wood. "I see you!" The little girl has just grown out of toddlerhood, with baby fat still present in her ankles and wrists. "Molly, no thank you. I saw you, young lady. Crossing the road without mama is not nice." Molly giggles. "That's not funny, Molly. I'm serious. Please hold my hand." Molly looks at me again through the fence. I shift just enough that she can't see me. "Mama, look!" "What is it?" Her mama reluctantly looks through the slit in the fence and sees nothing since I hide from her glance, but I can tell by her silence that she senses me there. We are both quiet on either side of the fence, me not breathing, the woman listening for my breath. "Okay, We're going to go now, the mother says like an announcement, like she knows I am there. Molly, take my hand, please. They leave. I exhale. I peer through the slit again and see child and mother crossing the street, Molly with ball in hand. I lean my head on the fence, looking through the opening, praying and praying for the van to come. My exhaustion and hunger make my eyes heavy and I nod off. I turn my left cheek onto the warm wooden surface of the fence post, and I can easily imagine it as a soft pillow. I shake my head, forcing myself to pay attention. I cannot miss this van. Don't miss the van, I tell myself. But my eyes are so heavy and the sound of my grumbling tummy is muted in my slumber. In my dreams, I am 6 years old again. Ma comes home with a new Sony stereo system. The Wright family has upgraded their sound system and donated the old one to her. I watch as she places an album, also a donation from the Wright family, on the platter of the turntable. You watch, huh? See this? Ma points to the fine hair at the end of the tone arm. This is a needle. When she lifts the tone arm, the platter automatically begins to turn. She carefully and ceremoniously places the stylus onto the record's first track. Clair de lune fills the speakers, fills our apartment, fills my heart. Don't touch this, huh? Ma says before heading to the kitchen to begin prepping dinner. I hold the album cover in my hand. Liberace piano gems, it reads on the cardboard sleeve. On it is a picture of a man beaming from ear to ear and wearing a silver cape. On the side is a superimposed image of his graceful hands covered in jewels and rings on the piano keys. I have never seen a man like that before, smiling so genuinely and wearing such lavish clothes. Still holding the album cover, I begin dancing around the room. I can feel the swoosh of air past my ears with every flourish of my hands, every waltz step through the house. The music sounds like birds just about to take flight. It sounds like eyes opening slowly in the morning. It sounds like fog dissipating in the warmth of the sun. I dance and dance through the house, bracing myself on chairs to lift my legs up, rolling along the floor on my knees, reaching up to the sky at these sensations in my body. What is this? My mother stands there, a plate of rice and beefsteak in each hand, staring at her child.
Thank you so much, Catherine. We'll get to how both of you center women and children a lot and very different communities in a bit, but I thought I'd go in for the jugular and tackle, the very hard stuff, of course, in both of your works. There's another harrowing scene in Crosshairs that you mention in Writing the Land, where a lynching happens, or where you describe one that becomes even more cynical, if that is possible, because it is located next to the AIDS victim memorial in Scarborough.
It's actually in Toronto. Yeah.
It's in Toronto.
In downtown Toronto, in Churchill Wellesley. Yeah.
I thought there was another one in Scarborough. So, okay, in Toronto. It is literally and figuratively close to home for you, of course. And Toronto infuses Crosshairs from pretty much the first page to the last sentence, very much. What does locating this book so precisely in Canada's biggest city, which is where we all are, however we got here or were born here, what does that mean for this near future that you describe, and maybe also for your personal imagined Canada? Is it for you, is it based in Toronto when you think about your future and your children's future? Could this have been Montreal? Could this have been Berlin? Could this have been something else?
It was very intentionally set in Canada because sadly, especially with the reality that we are living now, with resources running thin, the rise of fascism is it is a reality to many. Sadly, the idea of apocalypse is not new to the Indigenous folks of this land. And what I wanted to do was to create a book that really burned down what I always call it a marketing campaign that Canada has created around it being such an accepting and wonderful country to live in, when in actual fact, the indigenous people of land, many folks do not have access to running water. Their families are being torn apart by children's aid services, and Black folks are continually targeted by the police. So for me, setting it in Canada, I knew that there was some trepidation around its marketability, but to me, I was like, there is no way I can set it in some sort of mythical nowhere place. It had to definitely happen here, so that people understood the insidious nature of this Canadian marketing campaign, and to listen to what Indigenous and Black folks have been saying all along, that they are not safe. And it is about time to tell a story that shows that truth.
Mm-hmm. And again, we'll circle back to that a bit later, because I have more questions about that. But I also have questions about your writing, and something I'm personally struggling with a bit, and I really was interested in getting your take, Catherine, on the phrasing around diaspora and diasporic writing. Does the term, mean anything to you? Maybe perhaps it means nothing to you. Do you embrace it, or and that's a bit where I struggle or have sensibilities maybe. Is it just another context of othering? And I don't think you mentioned that in your when you briefly set up Crosshairs, but you call the group outside of the regime the others, literally with a capital O, right? So the othering is crystal clear in what you do. And you're both actually born Canadians. Does that make any sense to talk about? Because I know you get spoken about as diasporic writers. Maybe you love it, you embrace it. I know you all use multiple identities. We all, as we sit here, have multiple identities. But you very much identify. Where do you situate yourself in that, in the CanLit discourse around writing?
I think that what really matters is when someone, and most likely this affects the way that someone identifies, whether they identify as diasporic or not, is that it's whether or not you had choice. And so in my case, for my family, is that they were leaving the Philippines because of martial law. And although they did come here not as indentured workers or enslaved, they did have some choice as to where they were going to settle, but they had to leave the Philippines for that very reason, for a better life here in Canada. And so when you're part of the Filipino diaspora, in my case, I've always felt like a flower that has been repotted. If thinking about the metaphor of when you replant like a plant and you put it into another pot, is that there's always this moment of weakness in which it is sort of, it becomes stronger in that new pot, but it was never home. And so for Canada, I don't think, to be quite honest with you, I always know that this was not, although I've lived here all of my life, it doesn't necessarily feel like home. I mean, there is definitely wonder and beauty, and also just such a great amount of respect now, wanting, to be a person that lives by the treaty. And I recognize that treaty every day with how I treat the land where I occupy, because that's the least that I can do as someone who is a settler. But it, again, it's not home. It's land that was obviously stolen, and I always try to think of it that way. I always think, okay, I have to have absolute respect for everything around me, for that reason. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I
just wonder, Uzma, before we hear from you, and I set you up a bit better, if you wanted to jump in on that question of how do you feel about the diaspora. What I also appreciated a lot about both of you in your writing, but also when you do interviews and speak, you also kind of take your communities to task, and it's not that it's a black and white situation. It never is. How do you feel about that? Do you just go like, it's not my, I don't care about diasporic writing? Or
I really like what Catherine said about labels sort of being imposed on you, and I know the way that has sort of manifested in my life is that oftentimes I'm the one who comes out and kind of answers the question before it's asked. So I'll say, hi, it's almost like, hi, I'm Uzma Jalaluddin, I'm a writer, the daughter of immigrants from India, you know.
Yeah.
So it's almost like I want to take ownership of whatever label people are going to use for me before I sort of move on. And you know, I was born and raised in Scarborough, and I now live in Markham, and I feel like I'm part of a diaspora all around me because I've always lived in very black and brown spaces. And so I feel almost more comfortable within the diaspora rather than outside of it. It's home. That's what it feels like for me.
Huh. It's interesting. What I take away from Catherine is that the choice question that is so central, and from you, the ownership question, right? I hope I'm not misquoting, and I don't remember whether it was in Writing the Land, maybe Steph remembers, and I know it was Uzma who said that it's also the difference in your writing then, in your art, of the inside, being on the inside looking out versus being on the outside looking in, and that is a shift that is happening, and that we see in both of your works. So now let me properly introduce Uzma Jalaluddin, a writer born and raised, as you just mentioned, in Toronto's East End. And both of your novels have been longlisted for the Stephen Leacock Medal and the Toronto Book Awards. You're also a Toronto Star columnist and a high school teacher, as if that wasn't enough. And you are, I think, working on another project, because your Twitter handle says you're in the writing cave. You'll have to tease that before we go. But first, dear Uzma, give us a taste of Hana Khan. And since we're at the Goethe, I have to thank you for the line describing Hana's mother as Angela Merkel in full-on black hijab, which miraculously, I immediately know what you mean. I immediately have a full image of the person that Hana Khan's mom is, and we can all relate. So over to you and Hana.
Sure, thank you. So Hana Khan Carries On is basically, I'm building it as a retelling of You've Got Mail, the classic rom-com movie starring Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan, except it's set in rival halal restaurants in Scarborough. So that's sort of the thing, but there's, like all of my books, there's so many layers to it. There's so much going on. And so the passage I'm going to read is a bit of a reflection on Hana's passion, which is broadcasting. She really loves radio storytelling. She herself has an anonymous podcast that she has been working on, and that's sort of the conceit of the You've Got Mail, where she gets to know the love interest, Aiden, through the podcast. And the part that I'm going to be reading is Hana reflecting on radio and then also reflecting on an incident from her childhood in school. My father believed that great radio shows are born from passion and authenticity, a place where regular people tell stories that are important to them. I wanted to tell diverse stories that made a difference, that framed personal narratives in a way that allowed people to think about the world in a whole new light. I knew from experience that those narratives needed to be told by people on the inside looking out, because for too long they had been told by people on the outside looking in. The first time I had heard an outsider explain Islam was in grade 10 history, when my teacher, Mr. Nielsen, delivered a primer on world religions. He was one of the cool teachers at school, a young white man with floppy blonde hair, dimples, chunky square frame glasses. He always wore jeans and a button-down shirt paired with a colorful tie. Everyone loved Mr. Nielsen. He didn't make a huge deal if we were late and didn't deduct marks for typos. I always looked forward to his classes. We spent a week studying world religions, part of the intro to his Ancient Civilizations course. We started with Christianity before learning about Judaism, then Hinduism, and finally, it was my people's turn. Islam is a monotheistic religion, meaning that Muslims, the followers of the religion of Islam, worship only one God. I beamed at him. So far, so good, Mr. N. Then things went horribly wrong. Every Muslim believes in the 5 pillars of Islam. They are 1, belief in one God, 2, praying 5 times a day, 3, giving in charity, 4, fighting the jihad, and 5, performing the Hajj pilgrimage. I blinked. Fighting the jihad? What was he talking about? I raised my hand to correct him. Sir, jihad is not the 4th pillar of Islam. The 4th pillar is fasting during the month of Ramadan. Mr. Nielsen looked at me indulgently. I know you might not be comfortable with the truth, Hana, but you need to not feel ashamed. Fighting the jihad is a pillar of Islam. No, it's not, I said. I could feel my face flushing. As far as I knew, Mr. Nielsen was an agnostic. Why wasn't he listening to me, the only Muslim in his class? The 4th pillar of Islam is fasting in the month of Ramadan, definitely not jihad. "Can you prove it?" Mr. Nielsen asked. Even years later, I could feel my neck grow hot with embarrassment at the memory of those words. My classmates were snickering at this point, and I just wanted the confrontation to end. Because I read in a book that it's jihad, Mr. Nielsen continued, his tone hard. Can you prove that it isn't? Could I prove it? Not in a way that would satisfy him. The lesson continued with no more interruptions. I had plenty of teachers and professors over the years who listened to my opinions and respected my lived experience as a Muslim woman, but that memory rankled still. If there had been more visible Muslims, more South Asians making art and telling their stories, maybe I wouldn't have felt so alone and targeted. I would have been able to point to a character in a TV show or movie or in a book we had read in school for my proof. Instead, all I had was myself, and it hadn't been enough.
Thank you. Yeah,
welcome.
And thank you for choosing this particular section.
Very much related to what we're talking about.
Of course, what we were just talking about, and you, in a way, already answered one of the questions I was going to put to you. Another passage in the book that I had to labor over was Hana is doing an internship at a radio station, very successfully. But she, as her words, she gets put in the box, right? Basically, the diversity corner, where, they see her, she is hijabbed, she's 24, she's urban, but people assume she has a certain expertise and only that, and that is her job at the radio station. Now, you as an author of that background that you mentioned, second generation Canadian of Muslim Indian extraction, and also in the process of helping so much with representation and establishing authentic, non-stereotypical voices and characters of color in the CanLit mainstream. How do you, Uzma Jalaluddin, try not to be put in the box when you already said you often preface yourself with, "Hi, I am, and I am this." But how does that work in the world of literature, of publishing, of literary festivals? How do you become not just the hijabbed writer who is perceived for just that? How do you break out?
I feel like I often am. I'm often asked to participate in panels where it's obviously it's the diversity panel, and so they needed a Muslim, and I kind of there's only 5 of us, so they put me in the box. I said, yeah, I was the first one to say yes, I guess. But the way that I sort of push back is in the stories that I write. The art that I create is very different, I think, than what a lot of people are expecting. They look at the cover of Hana Carries On, and you have a beautiful hijabi on the cover, and yet the hijab has just like I'm wearing, it's a leopard print. I think this is leopard, I don't actually know, whatever, it's an animal print hijab. And the other thing is I often use humor in my writing. And the joke I always make is that, hey, Muslims can be funny too. We have a sense of humor. Just because all the stories you read are scary and about extremists, the ones that we write for ourselves are full of love and joy. And the way that I push back against it is just really leaning into that. So I think that my personality comes out in my writing and during presentations, and I love to laugh, and I think just existing and completely telling your story is how you can sort of push out of that box. But it is an ongoing battle, and sometimes I lose. Mm-hmm.
And probably a fine line where also, you guys, we need you, of course, also to speak to us about diversity, right?
Yeah,
otherwise it remains sort of a mainstream white conversation.
Actually, that's a good point, if I might add to this.
Yeah.
That oftentimes, I think, sometimes as racialized authors, we feel the weight of that representation. Mm-hmm. And as a result of that, I feel I'm overworked and probably underpaid because I know I have to say yes to a lot of things that maybe I just don't have the time for, or the bandwidth, whatever that term means, and just the energy for it. But oftentimes I'm thinking, if it's not me, who are they going to ask? Yeah. Because as I said, there's not a lot of us. I'm happy to see that those numbers are growing, but in the meantime, it's just me, and I feel like we're all fighting the good fight and trying to really represent and provide a different perspective on things. Yeah. So, but it can be exhausting.
And that is, that's labor and effort and time.
Yeah.
Reading your very different books. You both have written 2 major adult novels. And in both of your writings over the time, I noticed that you are increasingly tackling escalating political violence around the resurgence of the far right. And I wonder whether you can explain, Uzma, a bit about how you managed to put scenes of physical Islamophobia, physical violence, into a rom-com. And I mean, with Catherine, you radically racialize this near future Canada. So that's really the basis of this new book against an authoritarian regime. I'm just wondering how these genre or stylistic voices, we also didn't mention that Crosshairs is also, in a way, a number of letters that the protagonist writes to his lost, vanished lover. So you make very specific stylistic choices in your writing, and how that helps you in explore how the communities you write about experience hate, physical hate, danger.
Yeah, so I actually get asked this question a lot. How did I manage to make a rom-com so serious? And I feel in a way what my book is being marketed as is sort of the job of my publicists and the marketers and the publishers. But I just wrote the story that felt very honest to me when I was writing it. I started writing this book even before my first novel was published, actually, in 2017. And I wrote the bulk of it during that time. And to be frank, I was really angry when I wrote a lot of the book because Donald Trump was in power in the United States. There was a recent call for a Muslim ban in the US, and I was just really, even as though I'm a Canadian and I'm not directly impacted by this, right, because of my Canadian passport and my identity, and yet I could see the impact of that worldwide and as you said, rising tides of fascism and specifically anti-Muslim hate. And the way that I process pain is through my art. So I started writing this book. But I also process pain through humor. So it became funny somehow. I started including characters who I think were talking about really serious things. There's one character in particular, Rashid. He is the cousin of Hana. He's 18 years old. He comes from India to visit, and he's planning to stay as a student. And he just has fresh eyes on everything. Mm-hmm. So he sort of questions what Hana is doing. When Hana takes him downtown just to sort of show him the city, they are targeted because of her. She wears hijab, and they are targeted by 3 white supremacists who basically try to push them around, and Hana gets hurt in the process. And Rashid's reaction is like, we have to move on. What can you do? Build a dam against the hate. Use their hatred to power your activism in a way. And Hana, having lived a relatively privileged life within this very diverse community where she lives, really comes face to face with the idea of the other Canadians who don't see that she belongs. And so she takes her cousin's words for heart. But I also think we can celebrate life and joy while also tackling difficult issues. And that really is life. Life is good things and horrible things, and we just have to keep moving on.
That's again something that connects both of you. That is actually, we've used the words dystopia quite a bit here, and the fascist regime in it. But Catherine, your book is very hopeful. I mean, it has the resistance against this, and the resistance. Again, I can't spoil it, but the ending is just magnificent and hopeful and beautiful in a way. But how do you marry that with what is a near future dystopia at the end, and a harsh social commentary and critique?
Well, when I create my work, I very much just because it's not about me, it's just about what my ancestors are telling me to write, and so to me it's a form of mediumship. I sit there, I meditate, and I'm just like, what do you want me to say? And I just write down what they tell me to say. And what I understood my job was for making this book was I needed to issue both a warning and an example. So a warning of what was to come if we do not embody allyship, and also an example of what embodying allyship could actually look like. And also I had countless conversations with people from the QT BIPOC community saying, what would you want to see from those folks? What would it look like? What would actual change look like? And so in the book, to imagine a world in which people would actually do the work, right? So I really wanted to imagine a resistance where it's led by QT BIPOC people, but the work is all done by the allies so that we can just actually rest and declare our personhood to people. So yeah, like it was, and then also with regards to resistance, I mean, the resistance is also joy. Resistance is rest. There was a point where I felt quite hopeless writing it. You know, I wrote it during a time, a lot of people don't believe me, but I wrote it well before what, we're experiencing with regards to the pandemic. And I certainly didn't know, I wanted it to feel like, you put down the book and tomorrow this can happen. Did I know that people were gonna read the book and it was gonna look like exactly like what was happening or what happened yesterday? I did not know that. So with the book, I felt quite hopeless while writing it, but thankfully, because of Adrienne Marie Brown's Pleasure Activism book, which is incredible. It is a life-changing book for people who are at different intersections of oppression, that I was like, oh, my rest and my pleasure is actually part of me resisting. I don't need to be constantly in fight mode. What I need to do is to model the fact that I matter in this world because I'm making myself matter in my own life. So that was quite amazing. So there were several examples in the book where people find, even under this really, this authoritarian regime, is that people find small acts of pleasure and small moments of rest in order to resist a movement that is trying to annihilate them. Yeah.
Yeah, which gets us back to that counter narrative, right? And I mean, Steph, you'd set us up to talk about that image of Canada that Canadians have as we live here, but certainly people in other places, certainly Germans have it. It also gets fed a lot by governments, it gets fed by tourism authorities, and probably also artists. But again, what unites both of you, and now that I hear you speak and read about your work even more so, you're both urban, suburban. You write very much out of your lived experience, respectively, and your books center, and I love that in particular, women, children, LGBTQ2S communities. So if we imagine just for a moment, and I know that you both have children, if we just imagine for a moment that Canada is guest of honor at the Frankfurt Book Fair again in 20 years, let's say 20 years. What would you want to see from CanLit, as it's called? Who do you want to see? What do you want to see? And what would you hope would be different for your kids if they travel to Frankfurt and hear Canadian authors speak there?
I think I just want to see more. This is one of the things that Hana Khan says. She points out in one of her podcasts that she doesn't want to be the only person. She doesn't even want to be one of 3 or one of 5. She wants so many people who look like her succeeding that it's not a big deal because everybody's there. That's what I want to see. If my son is, well, at first I'd be surprised because he doesn't really read. But you're like, oh, that's a 180 for you. Good job. He's a teenager now, so he can. Should cut that out.
I miss you.
After I got over my shock, I would say I hope that there's so many people who look exactly like him, who are, as Catherine said, QT BIPOC people. Mm-hmm. That would be fantastic. Mm-hmm.
Catherine? For me, what I would really love is that everyone from the festival organizers to the people who are publishing, the agents, and everything, that there's representation in all of those things. Just because, inclusivity is sometimes, people like us are on like the front line, serving like a face to events, and we're checking a lot of boxes. But in order for those events, in order for the books, in order for these festivals to be more inclusive, it actually has to be from the top all the way down. And so I would really love to see more executive directors, more artistic directors. I would like to see more organizers and press to have representation from our community, because the more inclusivity you have at the table, the better the choices will be, so that we can feel welcome. Because I've been most definitely the diversity checkbox in numerous festivals, and when you have certain events that are organized by people that are not us, I can smell it, I can feel it, I can see it because of the different levels of respect that I'll have in that space. And so it would. That's what I would like to see in 20 years. Is that I won't feel that difference. Would be really interesting. But then again, as I said, it has to be an embodied allyship, and sometimes it means that people in leadership have to step to the side.
One danger is that what we just talked about, authenticity, lived experience, and your very unique voices, might get watered down or distorted or compromised in the translation of literature that you wrote to the screen. From how a story is eventually cast to, and we've all seen that and heard that, of course, this slapping on nonsensical, thick accents, for example, on characters, second-generation immigrants that simply do not have these accents in real life. How do you each feel about your stories being moved to the screen? Catherine, you actually, I had mentioned that, wrote the screenplay for Scarborough yourself, and I believe you have a fairly close relationship with the duo of directors. How did you safeguard what's at the heart of Scarborough for you? And I know you have also talked about the care to the community, so the people not in the film. That goes back to what you just said about you want that change at each level. You also want that care at each level. How do you deal with that film coming out?
Yeah, we had I had a few filmmakers that wanted to option the book, and I would look at their reel, and it was very polished, very lovely, but I was really nervous about the size of a film unit and how invasive that would be to my community, because we're not polished people in Scarborough, as you know, Uzma, and that's the charm of Scarborough. And so I really wanted to see, well, how can we capture the reality of our neighborhood? And so I, because of the fact that I have a background as a playwright, that I thought I reached out to Shasha and Rich from Compy Films, because they are shortlisted documentarians. I said, is it possible for me to write the script and then you can shoot it like a documentary? Is that even done? I don't even know if it is, because then I knew that with a documentary it's just one sound guy, one camera, pretty easy going, right? And they said, yeah, we can do it, sure. But the only thing is we had a deadline for some application in the next 2 weeks. So then I was like, oh, okay, well, because I wrote the book out loud, and so the dialogue was actually written out loud. I write my books out loud to make sure that they sound right off the page. There was a lot of cutting and pastes from the dialogue, and also looking at Google Images, because I didn't know how to format a script. So I just used that. I know, but that's totally Scarborough too, that we're like, I'll figure it out. Yeah, no, exactly. So I put it together, and then we got the funding, and I was like, really? I didn't think it was, so I finished the screenplay in 2 weeks.
And you had to write, oh my God.
Yeah, and I understood, because I love film so much, but I've never written one. So I knew, I was just like, okay, you already changed hats from a playwright to a novelist, and that was a very different, it's a different art form. Now you're gonna go into a screenplay, that's another hat. Just think of it as a different art form. And so I put on the different hat, and I strung it together in a completely different way that it's truthful, it's really connected to the book. So I know that book lovers are gonna really love the film, but they'll see that it's done in a way that is filmic, because I think, I mean, we've all seen book adaptations that sometimes you're like, I feel like we're just like turning the page, but the film is a very different art form. It's okay, just let it go. And the more you let go and really understand that, you know, like I think the theater is like almost like a baby mobile, you know, like past, present, here and there, like all these things are floating on this plane of the stage. A book feels like, to me, like as if it's like this very macro lens on the way that people's hands are moving, the way that they feel the sweat on their neck or everything. When it comes to filmmaking, all I kept on thinking was like the budget is I didn't know that someone turns the corner and then all of a sudden that costs another thousands of dollars, right? And you're like, oh, I didn't know that happened. So you have to really think about like how a film is told. Yeah. And I'm proud of it. I'm really happy. But we really had the community helped love it into being. There were like over 300 people that helped us because it was a micro budget. And those children were
with
fantastic.
The kid performers who you're starting to tease on social media. I've seen you introduce them, and they seem just like incredible, but so vested in what they're doing, right? This is not like a casting gig for them in a way.
And the children know that, they know what, like a lot of it because of the fact that Shasha and Rich are documentaries, it really was like, oh, catch what they're doing right there. Catch what they're doing. Even though they weren't necessarily doing what was in the script, kids were doing amazing things that it was so wonderfully out of our control. Mm-hmm. So that's how we kept it gritty and fun and light and true.
Now, Uzma, we might have a different situation working with networks, but what is the situation there? Will you have some say in either one of those two big film projects? Do you have a consulting role? What is your power to have these babies kind of be on these screens?
You know, so for both of the films, I'm a creative consultant, but that's a title that I'm not sure what that means entirely.
Exactly.
To be honest,
it's
you know, it's in the best scenario, it means that they would have me to consult on the script or their casting choices or just like even wardrobe or things like that. Yeah. In reality, because this is Hollywood, I don't know what that means yet. So I feel like I'm still sort of feeling my way through this thing. When I Chat Last was optioned for film, it was actually by Pascal Pictures, and they're a big Hollywood studio. And I accepted, and I was really grateful and happy that it was optioned by Pascal Pictures. My kids were thrilled because Amy Pascal is the producer behind the Spider-Man movies. So they were like, oh, so all of a sudden I'm cool now, right? So I'm like, and then at the time she was with Sony, she's now moved on to Universal, but when she was with Sony, they were like, wait, are we gonna get a PS4? Is this what's gonna happen? You know, they're kids. But at the same time, I was very pragmatic, and I saw this as more of a, the fact that my first novel, which is an unapologetically Muslim story set in Scarborough, which features like the main Mr. Darcy is Pride and Prejudice retelling. Mr. Darcy is basically a guy in a beard and a long white dress and like a skull cap, you know, who doesn't even shake hands with women. The fact that someone like Amy Pascal, who has so much power in Hollywood, thought that this would be interesting enough to be optioned to even explore the idea of making a movie, it meant a lot to my community. That's really what it was. I mean, of course I was excited and I'm thrilled and I still am, but I knew what this meant for perhaps the filmmakers and the writers were coming up behind me. It's hope, even if nothing happens. And you know, the reality is a lot of books get optioned in Hollywood and not a lot of them make it to film. But the fact that it was optioned means something. Yeah. And then when Hana Khan Carries On came out and was, you know, it had some interest as well. And then when Mindy Kaling threw her hat in the ring, I was like, this is fantastic. She is a dark-skinned woman of color. She is of Indian descent. I love this for Hana.
She did great with Never Have I Ever.
I really enjoyed Never Have I Ever, and you know, she also did 4 Weddings and a Funeral, which I think only streamed on Hulu, but that's also great. And you know, even the Mindy project. So I thought this is really exciting for me, but else will see this as a very hopeful, inspiring sign. So I guess I'm a little pragmatic about it. It's I know that I'm giving up control over my book, and I am, fingers crossed, and I do trust them. We have had conversations about representation, and I have basically said, I don't care what you do with the story, you can change it, but just make sure you get the Muslim representation right. And I know that books are very different, as Catherine was saying, than a novel. It's two completely different art forms, really. But just, if you turn CanLit into a terrorist, I am going to lose it. So that was basically my one thing. He's not. This is it's a love story about Muslims to Muslims. So keep that straight. And I do feel a shift in publishing and movies and TV shows. Like, there is an interest in diversity, and they're getting it wrong sometimes, and they're getting it right sometimes, and it's an ongoing process, and I'm along for the ride.
And we'll see whether we'll stay in Scarborough or end up in, I don't know, Portland, Oregon, or Houston, Texas, but and whatever that does to the story.
I should say they did hire a screenwriter who is a visibly Muslim woman, and that makes me feel, for both projects, it's the same person, and she's amazing. So I know her. We've become friends, so I'm confident. I think that eases my sense of confidence.
Which also gets me to the last question, because I don't want to forget, because I teased you about the writing cave, that I wanted to end with just asking you to just touch upon what's next for you and what you're working on, as much as you can tease.
So my third book will be coming out in 2023 with HarperCollins Canada again, and I'm currently working on it, and it's another romantic comedy. It's also set in Scarborough. I see this as sort of like my Scarborough trilogy. It's a trilogy. Now
we have a Scarborough trilogy.
No rom-coms existed about Muslims before, and hopefully there'll be 3 by 2023, which is fantastic. And right now it's sort of, it's basically a lot of the novel is taking place in, I'm inspired by this very large Toronto Muslim conference that pre-COVID used to take place in downtown Toronto. So it's sort of, it's like Comic-Con, but for Muslims. That's what it is. And it's this huge hookup scene too. So it's very fun. And yet families show up, kids show up. I have to drag my kids. And I used to go to this conference or conferences like it when I was younger, and it was just, it's oftentimes in downtown Toronto, and for kids from the suburbs, it's just a fun adventure over the course of the weekend. And in my third novel, this is where love will blossom. So that I can't say more about that because I'm too early in the draft to really figure it out. But that's the rough outline, and I'm also working on a play. So Catherine, I might have to have a conversation with you about that. My very first play. It's a romantic comedy. It is being put on by the Silk Road Institute, which is a Muslim-focused arts organization that is in Montreal. So we're hoping for winter 2022, but I guess we'll see.
Amazing. Your children's book we did mention, but are you then working on something right now? Are you writing something?
So right now we're in production for an audio sketch comedy show that I have coming out with Audible called Imminent Disaster. And so it's comedy for the apocalypse. And I know, right? Because what do you do other than just laugh about the absurdity of our times? I have a couple of other television projects. I have, during this time, I treated it like a writer retreat because, right? Like being stuck in your house, I just tried to pretend that I was in a writer's retreat. So I ended up writing 2 novels. One of them is called PSW, which is about the unlikely friendship between a cisgender Filipina caregiver and the person that she's serving, who is an elderly white trans woman who has dementia. The other novel is called Behind You, which is it's loosely based on my experiences coming of age during a time that the Scarborough rapist was at large in Scarborough. And we all know who that is. We don't need to say his name, but that's what that is about. And and as you mentioned, that my third kids book is coming out. It's just to help kids deal with these scary times.
I need it faster. I need it now.
Where do your feelings live? And so right now we're in the middle of just solidifying like the illustrations for that, and I'm so very thrilled. It's been an amazing. It's just been an amazing adventure creating that book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Speaking of tough times, there's so many connections now between you. I realize. I do read your parenting column anyway, and there was one sort of a how to talk to kids about the news and disasters, and there were some really beautiful pointers because I'm just struggling with relaying what is happening in Afghanistan to my young daughter, right? So yeah, we all have these challenges. Steph, so Catherine and Uzma have just set us up to how they would imagine the future of CanLit. Where do you see Writing the Land contributing to that ongoing conversation?
So, I mean, what's really magical to me is that at the time we were shooting, these books didn't exist, right? The books that we're seeing here today. So, when we were filming, Catherine and Uzma were reading from transcripts. It was a work in progress, and that was really important to us to sort of illuminate that work in progress, like writers at work, and what I find now is what is quite magical, and I really hope that that viewers who are watching a series have a sort of like have a similar experience. Is that when I was reading the books, the words, as soon as I came to the section that Uzma and Catherine were reading in the series, they just sort of jumped out at me. And so I would really hope that this is what happens with viewers. They watch the series and then they go out and get the book. Because ultimately, the series is really just a thinly veiled mission to get people to read all these amazing writers. But then also, I think the second thing that I would hope is that, in a way, the series and the books kind of almost have like this interplay with each other, so that you read the book, you watch the series, and you really see almost like a completely another dimension that opens up for you, where you can see these writers in their world, like how they live, who they are as people, as artists, and you really get to see the place that is important to them, like the Canada that they live in, the Canada that they also bring to life in the books, and that we can really, I think this is where we come around to this idea of fighting the cliche, is that you would really get to see a much more real Canada than the cliche, and you would really see what are places like Markham, what are Scarborough, like what are they actually like, and what is the beauty, what is the celebration, what's the fun, what's the joy, but what are also some of the very real issues that we're struggling with on a daily basis in a very real way.
Let me thank all three of you for coming in to share your stories, your writing, and your thinking, and our hopes for the future. I hope everybody will get to pick up these books that are not. Why are your books not out in German?
That's a good question.
I'm amazed that yours isn't.
No,
yeah,
it's not.
no, I mean both of you.
Yeah.
I'm like, we have to change this. We have to do something about that, I guess. But do pick them up in the original, and I hope everybody's going to get to see the films, and of course, Writing the Land, which will live on in various streaming formats, but be on CBC and CBC, so CBC Gem as well, right? It'll be online and broadcast, so we'll all get to see it this fall. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.